Occasionally, they'll print cards that are actually just weaker versions of existing cards, which were printed after the original cards and not before them. And in this list, we're going to go over some of the best cards in the game, which were supposed to be de-evolutions of their original counterparts to be weaker, but on some occasions actually surpass their original inspirations in playability. And at number 10, we have elemental hero Neos Alias. This is a level 4 Gemini monster with 1900 attack, which has the effect where it's treated as a normal monster while face up on the field or in the graveyard. However, if you have your normal summon available and it's on the field, you can use your normal summon in order to Gemini summon the card, in order to turn into an effect monster, which gives it the effect where its name just becomes Elemental Hero Neos while it's on the field. This card was meant to be the de-evolution of Elemental Hero Neos, and solely existed as a way to get Neos' name on the field easier by being attached to a level 4 monster, whereas the original Neos is level 7 and much harder to get out. However, this obviously was too strong to just attach to a normal effect monster, so they had to tie it to a Gemini monster with one more step in order to actually get the name on the field. Or I guess that was their thought process back in the day. Because you needed Neos' name on the field in order to go to the plethora of fusion monsters that required it to be on the field for contact fusion. However, Neos Alias was never used competitively for its intended purpose, and was entirely used specifically because of everything else about the card. The fact that it was a hero monster that was light, had 1900 attack, which was a premium stat line back then, could be treated as a normal monster in the graveyard, was a Gemini monster, and was warrior, were all a whole bunch of very useful things that combined together allowed it to actually have some pretty decent success in Bubble Beat and Hero OTK decks. The fact that it was light meant it was a target for Honest, and could be used for going into Elemental Hero the Shining, one of the best Omni heroes. The fact that it was Gemini meant it was a target for Gemini Spark, which was a pretty decent quick play spell card, which required you to tribute a level 4 Gemini monster specifically in order to target and destroy one card on the field, then draw one card. And the fact that it was treated as a normal monster in the graveyard meant it was a target for Hero Blast, which was a trap card that would add a normal hero monster from your graveyard to your hand, then destroy a monster in the field that had less attack than that monster. And at 1900 attack, Neos Alias was a pretty decent target to basically destroy anything on your opponent's side of the field, while going +1 in the process. Neos Alias was so useful for its stats that it's kind of a hallmark for a card that can be useful despite never actually using its main effect. And at number 9, we have Lightning Vortex. This is a normal spell card which has the effect where you can discard one card from your hand in order to destroy all face-up monsters your opponent controls. This card is the de-evolution of Raigeki, a card which just allows you to destroy all monsters your opponent controls without any other kind of restrictions or costs. Lightning Vortex was released in a time when Raigeki was banned for being too strong, and was supposed to be a weaker version of the card, requiring a discard instead of being completely costless, and only working on face-up cards, leaving face-down defense position 1 safe. But the effect of being able to wipe out all of your opponent's face-up monsters was so strong that Lightning Vortex absolutely saw competitive play, and saw so much play that it was actually limited on the ban list for a while. So at a time in Yu-Gi-Oh's history, Raigeki was banned and Lightning Vortex was limited for being way too strong, even though it was just a weaker version of that card. However, nowadays, Raigeki is unlimited at 3 copies and doesn't really see very much competitive play, since there was an evolution of the card called Lightning Storm released, which could be considered a huge upgrade of Lightning Vortex as well, since it only affects face-up monsters too, but more specifically attack position ones. And at number 8, we have Foolish Burial Goods. This is a normal spell card which has the effect where you can send one spell or trap card from your deck to the graveyard, with the added restriction that the card is a hard once per turn, so you can't use other copies of it in your hand during the turn you use one of them. Now, this card is a de-evolution of Foolish Burial, a card which has an effect to send a monster card from your deck to the graveyard without a hard once per turn. Foolish Burial is an incredibly strong card because of how many cards benefit from being sent to the graveyard, and has basically been limited on the ban list since it was added to the game. So Konami tried to create a weaker retrain that only works on spells and traps, and there are a lot less floating and graveyard effects on spell and traps than monsters. And even then, they gave it a hard once per turn, so you wouldn't be able to use multiple of them during the same turn. And honestly, if it didn't have this restriction, it probably would be limited on the ban list just like Foolish Burial. Because Foolish Burial Goods has seen a ton of competitive play in modern Yu-Gi-Oh!, even if it didn't see a lot of play when it was first released to the game. Over time, they just released a lot more spell and traps that have good graveyard effects, like how Virtual World Gate Quinglong can get your entire engine online, same with Ice Barrier for Umi control decks. The card also saw a recent surge in popularity after the release of Rainbow Bridge of Salvation, since Rainbow Bridge has an effect in the graveyard in order to search out a field spell card from your deck. So Foolish Burial Goods basically became a terraforming, which is limited on the ban list. And being able to search out your overpowered field spell cards is definitely worth running all of these cards in certain decks. And at number 7, we have D.D.R. Different Dimension Reincarnation. This is an equip spell card which requires you to discard one card, then allows you to special summon any one of your banished monsters in attack position. The card then equips itself to that monster, and if this card leaves the field in any way, you destroy the equipped monster. This card is a de-evolution of the banned card Premature Burial, which is an equipped spell card that can special summon any monster from your graveyard by paying 800 life points. And if Premature Burial is destroyed, then it also destroys the monster it's equipped to. However, only if it's destroyed. So you could reuse the card if you bounced it back to your hand, which D.D.R was trying to prevent with its restriction. However, it didn't prevent it well enough, because the card was used in Dark Warrior combos to return to the hand in order to be reused anyway. Being able to generically special summon a monster on a spell card during your turn is incredibly powerful, because of just the vast amounts of loops and combos it enables, that even though you have to go -1 to use D.D.R and it only grabs banished monsters, meant the card still saw a lot of competitive play, and was even bounced to the hand to use again in the same turn with Zephyros the Elite, and people would even bring out cards like Power Tool Dragon just to search it out. In fact, the card was too good that they created another de-evolution of the card called Overdone Burial, which gives even more restrictions on what cards you can bring out, and they even slapped a hard once per turn on its effect, so it can't be reused like the other two cards. And at number 6, we have Mind Control. This is a spell card which allows you to take control of one of your opponent's monsters until the end of the turn. However, that card cannot attack or be tributed. This card is a de-evolution of Change of Heart, which is a card that allows you to just take control of one of your opponent's monsters until the end of the turn, without any restrictions on that monster. Until recently, Change of Heart was actually banned because the effect was very good. So they printed Mind Control in order to be a weaker version of that effect, where you can't steal your opponent's monster in order to crash it into another one, or use it as tribute fodder for Monarch decks. And the reason this effect is so strong is because it's an inherent +1 in card advantage, and gets past all kinds of monster protections, because your opponent loses a monster and you gain a monster at the same time, while only losing one card from your hand. And since it doesn't destroy or move the card off the field, very few cards have protection from being stolen. And then with modern extract monsters that can use the card as material, the fact that the card can't be tributed doesn't really matter, because most decks don't tribute anymore. Especially once Link monsters came out, Mind Control became just an extra material to go into Access Code Talker, and turned Mind Control into a premium going second card. And in fact, the card had to be put back on the ban list and is currently limited to 1 in the TCG, because it's still really good, even if they recently unbanned Change of Heart, which is also at 1 copy. So currently, the weaker version and the original both sit on the ban list at 1 copy, and absolutely see competitive play together. And at number 5, we have Pot of Prosperity. This is a spell card which has the effect where you can banish 3 or 6 cards of your choice from your extra deck face down, in order to look at the top 3 or 6 cards of your deck, and add one of those cards to your hand. Then you put the other cards back on the bottom of your deck in any order, you can't draw any cards by card effects this turn, and additionally, your opponent only takes half damage for the rest of the turn. So, lots of restrictions in order to basically just have the effect of Upstart Goblin. And this card is 2 levels of remakes, or de-evolutions, away from its original. First off, there is Pot of Greed, the original, which just allows you to draw 2 cards from your deck. Then they created a retrain in 2010 called Pot of Duality, which at the cost of not being able to special summon for the rest of the turn, as well as being on a hard once per turn, you can look at the top 3 cards of your deck and add one of them to your hand. And Pot of Duality was so good, it basically never stopped seeing competitive play after it was released. And Pot of Prosperity was released more recently, and has a more advanced version of Pot of Duality's effect, so it's 2 degrees separated from Pot of Greed. And being able to dig 6 cards deep in your deck in order to find one is so powerful that it's generally considered the strongest of all of the Pot retrains, even better than Pot of Duality, the card is based on, since it doesn't restrict you from special summon. And the reason for this is because being able to look at the top 6 cards of your deck and pick one actually gives you a very large chance of finding the absolute best card you need in your current situation. Currently, there aren't really cards that allow you to search for floodgates from your deck very easily. So if you're playing a deck that needs one of its floodgates on the field, Pot of Prosperity is one of the best ways to try and get one of those in your hand, even though it doesn't specifically have an effect to search any of them out. Because chances are one of the top 6 cards of your deck is going to be a floodgate if your deck is playing them, and if it's not, then it'll be something else that probably might help advance your game state. In fact, the card is so good at increasing the odds of getting the right card in your hand that it's often played over Pot of Extravagance, which is another card that allows you to use your extra deck as a resource in order to draw cards, where Pot of Extravagance can allow you to banish 6 cards from your extra deck to draw 2 cards. Whereas for the same cost, Prosperity only allows you to get 1, and people vastly prefer to use Prosperity, because getting 1 card that you need is better than getting 2 random cards in most cases. And at number 4, we have Appointer the Red Lotus. This is a trap card that requires you to pay 2,000 life points, reveal your own hand to your opponent, then you're allowed to look at your opponent's hand and banish 1 card until your opponent's next end phase. So if you use this card in your opponent's turn, the card is only gone for that turn. This card is a de-evolution of the banned trap card Trap Dust Shoot, or it could also be a de-evolution of Confiscation, a banned spell card. Trap Dust Shoot has the effect where you can only activate when your opponent has 4 or more cards in their hand, and allows you to return 1 monster card from your opponent's hand back to their deck. Confiscation is a spell card which requires you to pay 1,000 life points in order to gain the absolutely broken effect of looking at your opponent's hand and discarding 1 card. Many decks would love to have Confiscation unbanned to be able to look at your opponent's hand in order to get rid of a hand trap or play around whatever other interaction they might have. So the best way to balance the effect would be to place it on a trap card and make it only usable during your opponent's turn, or on anything other than your first turn. which is what they were trying to do when they tried to fix the effect with Appointer the Red Lotus. Give it a huge life point cost, gave your opponent information on your hand, so information was even on both sides, and only temporarily got rid of the card. However, this was still too powerful in the modern game, because most games don't last very many turns. So being able to have this effect for even one turn was incredibly powerful. And funnily enough, the main reason this card became so powerful was precisely because it was a trap card that can be used during your opponent's turn. What you would do is send the card to the graveyard with something like Curious, then you would set it to the field with Nightmare Griffin, and use it during your opponent's draw phase in order to look at their hand and get rid of one of their board breaker cards like Dark Ruler No More, Evenly Matched, or Lightning Storm. All cards which cannot be chained in response to Appointer the Red Lotus during the draw phase. That way, you could further protect your board of negates from any of those powerful going second cards that might be able to disable their effects. Konami printed these very powerful going second cards precisely to deal with unbreakable boards, and Appointer the Red Lotus was kind of getting around them, and allowing first turn players to create truly unbreakable boards, where your opponent wasn't even allowed to draw into the right cards that might let them come back. So it was limited to 1 on the ban list in order to kind of stop these combos, even if they also had Curious on the ban list so you couldn't send it to the graveyard so easily anymore. And speaking of Curious, at number 3 on this list, we have Curious the Lightsworn Dominion. This is a Link 3 monster which requires exactly 3 monsters with the same attribute, but they all must have different types from each other. And it has the effect that when it's summoned, you can send any one card from your deck to the graveyard. Additionally, if a card is sent from your deck to the graveyard, you can send the top 3 cards of your deck to the graveyard. And if it's removed from the field by your opponent, you can add a card from your graveyard to your hand. This card could be considered a de-evolution of Lavalval Chain, which is a generic rank 4 monster that allows you to detach 1 material to send any card from your deck to the graveyard. Lavalval Chain is considered one of the most powerful monsters of all time, just period. Because the ability to send any card from your deck to the graveyard on an easy to bring out extra deck monster is just so powerful for all kinds of combos and FTKs, even if it's not generically powerful for just the average non-combo deck. However, Konami still wanted some version of the effect to kinda be in the game, so they gave it to Beatrice, Lady the Eternal, which is a much harder to bring out monster, as it requires 2 level 6 monsters, and was played so heavily it's currently limited on the ban list as well. And then they gave its effect again to Curious, although requiring 3 monsters with even more stringent restrictions. Getting 3 different monsters of different types on the field should be very hard to accomplish outside of incredibly specific decks. So it seemed like a safe bet to finally give this effect to an extra deck monster that was this hard to bring out. However, the Danger archetype kinda made this card too easy to bring out instead, as all of them are Dark Attribute, can special summon themselves from the hand while drawing cards, and are of different types. So if you just played a Danger engine in your deck, since Dangers could absolutely just be played as an engine with other strategies, you could easily go into Curious and just get any card in your deck you wanted in the graveyard. Then, like I mentioned earlier, you can go into Nightmare Griffin next in order to get a spell or trap card out of the graveyard onto the field, using another generic extra deck monster. And additionally, you just got to mill 3 cards as well, because it's part of the Lightsworn archetype, and their archetype is all about milling their own deck. And when Tier Laments were running around the meta, this card was eventually banned because the effect was already very powerful on its own. It was made even better when combined with an archetype that could play the Dangers natively, and benefited from milling cards. Even if Tier Limit players stopped using the Danger engine once the Shizu cards came out, it was kind of banned as a way to just try to rein in the deck, before they eventually just limited all of the main deck cards. And at number 2, we have Return from the Different Dimension. This is a trap card which has the effect where you can pay half your life points to special summon as many of your banished monsters as possible. However, they're all banished during the end phase. This card was the de-evolution of the spell card Dimensional Fusion, which has the effect where you can pay 2,000 life points to special summon as many of your banished monsters as possible, although your opponent gets to do the same. Even back in early Yu-Gi-Oh! Before modern extra deck monsters were released, they were able to take advantage of Dimension Fusion in order to perform loops to win in one turn. So the card was banned, and they created a retrained weaker version in Return from the Different Dimension, which couldn't be used immediately on your first turn, so no longer loopable, required half your life points instead of only 2,000, and got rid of all the cards during the end phase, so you couldn't keep them. However, once modern extra deck monsters came out, you wouldn't keep them on the field anyway, as you would use them all for synchros and then later XC summons. And Return from the Different Dimension just kind of consistently saw competitive play until it was finally banned in 2014. Back in Teledad decks, the card was used in order to recover resources banished in order to use the effect of Dark Arm Dragon, and it was finally Dragon Rulers that got the card banned, because the Dragon Rulers would banish all kinds of cards in order to bring themselves out, which you would just bring back with Return from the Different Dimension in order to completely blow out your opponent with a +4. And Return from the Different Dimension has to be one of the strongest de-evolution cards, which is just powerful in its own right. However, the number 1 spot kinda takes the cake for a card that was supposed to be weaker than its original counterpart, but ended up becoming so much stronger that people probably forget it was originally a de-evolution in the first place. And at number 1, we have Grinder Golem. This is a level 8 monster with 3,000 attack, which has the effect where it can't be normal summon or set, and can only be special summoned to your opponent's side of the field at the cost of getting up your normal summon for the turn. And what you get for giving your opponent a 3000 beater is 2 level 1 Grinder tokens in attack position with 0 attack. And since you can't normal summon during the turn use Grinder Golem's effect, you couldn't even use them to tribute summon for a Monarch or something in the early days when Grinder Golem came out. And in fact, not being able to use a normal summon was such a bad detriment that Grinder Golem was kind of a gimmick card that people couldn't really figure out why it was made, other than fulfilling the conditions for Infernal Tempest, which is a spell card that allows you to banish all monsters in both players' decks and graveyards, if you meet the condition where you take 3000 more points of battle damage in one swing, although this was always kind of a gimmick deck. And Grinder Golem was meant to be the weaker version of Lava Golem, which is a card that has a similar summon condition as Grinder Golem, except it requires you to tribute 2 of your opponent's monsters in order to give it to your opponent, whereas Grinder Golem gives you 2 monsters in order to give it to your opponent. And then whoever controls Lava Golem takes 1000 points of burn damage during each of their standby phases. And Lava Golem is so good, it still sees competitive play to this day, as a way to get rid of your opponent's impossible to outboss monsters. And Grinder Golem didn't actually get rid of anything with his effect, it simply just gave you 2 weak tokens. However, this became incredibly powerful once Link monsters came out, because both of the golems lacked a once per turn on their summoning condition. You see, what you would do with Grinder Golem is just give it to your opponent and get 2 tokens. Then you would convert those into a Caustic Magician, bouncing Grinder Golem back to your hand as long as it was summoned right above one of the extra monster zones. Then you would just bring it out again and use those 2 new tokens to go into a Security Dragon, because remember, Grinder Golem is not once per turn. So you would then use Security Dragon to bounce it back to your hand. Then you would use it again, using the new 2 tokens to go into Firewall Dragon to bounce it back to your hand for a 3rd time. Then you could use it for a 4th time, have 6 links worth of materials on the field with those plus 2 tokens to then start your combos. So a single Grinder Golem in hand accounted for 6 materials worth of links on the field, which was just an insane amount of value, especially since this could be added on to go even further beyond in some strategies. But at the very least, you could use this effect 4 times in order to get a whole bunch of monsters on the field, all at the cost of just giving up your normal summon, which didn't even matter most of the time since pre-errata Firewall Dragon would be able to just special summon monsters from your hand anyway, or sorry, just Skull Dread later on in your combos. So once Link monsters came out, Grinder Golem became one of the strongest monsters in the game overnight, as it accounted for so much advantage in this new Link era that the card is still banned to this day, even with all the changes done to Link monsters, because it still accounts for a whole bunch of extra materials for just a single card from your hand. And it's easier to use in Return from the Different Dimension, and is honestly better than Curious Lightsworn Dominion, which is why it's number 1 on this list. Alright, and that's the list. There's actually a surprising number of de-evolution cards in the game. So if you know of any other ones I may have missed, or have any other ideas for future videos just like this one, please let us know down in the comments below.